What is up, everybody? This is Adam. Welcome back to Fouled Out. Matt is going to be joining me in just a minute to talk week 17 of the NFL season, as well as some of our preseason predictions and our top 10 quarterback list updates for the season. Before we get started, did just want to mention briefly, it's a really hard week to be talking NFL football with what happened Monday Night Football, the safety from the Bills. Really scary play, especially because the hit is, if you watch the replay, the hit's just kind of a normal football play. And then to see him go down like that after it, and obviously everything that's happened since then is really scary. And obviously we hope he's okay, and our best wishes to him and his family in what's a very difficult time for them. Matt and I talked today during our pre-show meeting and decided that the best way forward for this episode of the podcast was going to be to stick with our regularly scheduled programming. So that's what we're going to do. But best wishes for DeMar. Man, I really hope everything's okay. Scary moment last night. But Matt is coming on in just a minute to talk week 17 of the NFL. Let's go. All right, Matt is here, fresh off week 17 of the NFL season. Now going into the extra week that we've added, week 18, as the final week of the NFL season. Matt, how are you, my friend?
I am ready for the wild card berth.
Fingers crossed, man. It's
I'm gonna speak it into oblivion.
The Lions are still very much in it, but you got the primetime game against the Packers.
Yep.
That we talked about. But you also need Seattle to lose.
Mm-hmm.
It's always such a shitty situation when you have to rely on someone else to lose and you don't control your own destiny.
It is. And that is the nature of that Carolina loss, right? While that's probably something that the team needed for growth, you can't afford that. You are in a tough spot now.
Yeah, I mean, it's the nature of any of the losses from the 1-7 start this season, or 1-6 or whatever they were.
Yeah.
Like you can go back to the 3-point loss against Philly. You can go back to the close loss against Seattle, which is the tiebreaker that they have over you guys.
Yeah.
There's the Vikings game that you should have won. There's all sorts of nitpicks in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Actually was listening to a podcast the other day where they were talking about how all of these teams that are in that glut of 7-9 to 9-7, where so much of the league seems to be this season, they're like, oh, I feel like every game or every team could have had one or two more games they could have won, and one or two more they could have lost. And it's like, no shit,
literally an explanation of the entire NFL.
It's like, this is the NFL.
You can say that about the Bills and Chiefs,
well, but especially these teams that are mediocre, that are kind of in the middle, they play the vast majority of their games really close. And so many NFL games can go either way just based on one play or a bounce or a call or anything like that. It's the nature of the game. And I was like, I had to turn the podcast off because I was like, this is the worst analysis I've listened to. They're like, oh, the Steelers are 8-8 now. I feel like they could have been 10-6. Yeah. And the Vikings could have been 1-12 this season.
Yeah, right.
It's the fucking NFL. It's how the NFL works. Anyway, what we're doing today, we're not really talking week 17 as much or week 18 as much. We're taking the time today to go back and look at our preseason predictions and look at how we fared and how our opinions have changed throughout the course of this season. Typically, podcasts would do this after week 18.
Yeah.
But when we come back next week, we're talking wild card weekend, baby.
Yeah.
We're talking gambling picks next weekend. We're going to pick all 6 games, and we're going to give you our gambling picks for all 6 games as well. We're talking props. We're talking storylines. We're blowing it out for wild card weekend. So this is really the time every year where we go back and say okay, what did we get right? What did we get wrong? What still has a chance of being right and wrong?
Yeah.
And what has aged well and has aged poorly.
Turns out our predictions for this year were kind of all or nothing.
There are some, like looking back, there are some that look really good, some that look not really good. Um, One that I actually thought was funny that we were talking about today. So we both had Bills Rams in the Super Bowl.
Yep.
And I had the Rams beating the Bills. And I was just like, God, that's such a shit take. Like looking back on that, it's so hard right now. And I went
Yeah.
back and listened to our final preseason podcast. And during that podcast, so like we did our picks pod, and then Jimmy Garoppolo re-signed with the 49ers.
Yeah.
And I actually talked about changing my pick from the Rams to the 49ers in the Super Bowl.
But you didn't do it.
I'm taking credit, man.
Nope.
Should have done it.
You got to officially do
Should
it.
have fucking done it. That's a brutal one to start with. I mean, the Bills are looking good. The Rams, it's been a season from hell for a team that, I mean, we talked about this last season. We talked about it at the beginning of this season. It's a team that has a ton of top line talent.
Yep.
And not so much depth. And so the Stafford injury, the Cup injury, Aaron Donald not playing, like losing guys on that team seems to have an even larger effect than like losing a superstar on a normal team that has a little bit more depth.
It's not just losing Stafford and Cup and Aaron Donald. It's you lose, one of those guys that's just like kind of solid for you. And that lack of depth means that like you don't have anyone solid behind them to fill that role. And so losing a role player on a roster like that is like losing a star player.
Yeah, it's been a brutal season for them. There's actually been quite a few playoff contenders who ended up having brutal seasons, like teams that were consensus playoff teams at the beginning of the season that just were either like injuries took them or just, God, they were bad.
Yeah.
Think about like the Colts and the Broncos in the AFC.
Yep.
Those were consensus division winners and wild card teams. And just awful seasons for both of those franchises.
Yeah.
But looking back at our playoff predictions, we actually weren't too far off, even with all, there's going to be twists and turns and you're never going to go perfect on these things.
Yeah.
So I was 5 of 7 in the AFC, and I'm either going to be 4 or 5 of 7 in the NFC, depending on if Green Bay makes it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a chance at being like 10 for 14, which not bad. Missed two teams in each conference. Matt's either going to be 4 or 5 and 7 in the AFC, depending on who wins the Titans-Jags game. Because you had the Titans in as a wild card. And then you're going to be 3 or 4 of 7 in the NFC, depending on Green Bay.
There was a part of me that wanted to leave Green Bay out of the playoffs preseason. But I kind of talked myself into the fact that like the NFL would do its divine intervention thing and make sure they get in there. They very well might do that. We have seen them do that to the Lions before. They also didn't do that for them all year long because they've been garbage.
It's funny. I had the biggest gambling win of the year, like for me personally, this past weekend. And basically all I did was parlay the teams that the NFL would need to have win last week in order to set up a Lions-Packers do or die game this week.
Yeah.
And I put a bunch of money on it. Absolutely nailed it. Matt, I follow a very simple gambling philosophy in life. There are certain quarterbacks that you bet against in certain situations. You bet against Aaron Rodgers in the playoffs. You bet against Kirk Cousins in primetime. You bet against any Jets quarterback in any must-win situation ever. And most importantly, you bet against Carson Wentz on days that end in Y. If you follow this philosophy, I guarantee you will make money. We need Aaron Rodgers to make the playoffs, Matt. It's in the philosophy. It's one of my 4
that's
tenets of gambling.
that is true. That is good for the money. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that Washington shoehorned Carson Wentz back into the lineup.
What percent chance do you think that was like a wink wink by the NFL where they're like, hey, we really need Cleveland to win this week so we can set up this Lions Packers primetime game? If Dan Snyder, if you start Carson Wentz, we'll drop some of the punishment against you for this upcoming investigation.
Say there's at least a 10% chance of that.
Oh, I'm going polar opposite. I think there's a 90% chance that happened. I don't trust Roger Goodell as far as I can throw him, and it's not very far.
I think that Dan Snyder is dumb enough to do that on his own.
I didn't understand. I didn't understand it at the time. And as soon as I saw the odds, I was like, oh my God, Cleveland is plus money against Carson Wentz. We're 100% going for it. So I had Cleveland, Detroit, and the Packers all to win. I had the Seahawks to win on a separate bet. I had all sorts of things. It was a great weekend. We should have gone on Certified Beef this weekend and given picks because I nailed everything.
I need to have a better plan when I start gambling, and that plan should probably be only when you're sober.
I'm going to give you my best gambling advice. Don't gamble.
Yes.
Don't do it. Just don't do it. But if you're going to do it safely.
Yes. Do it sober. Because you know what happens is like you identify the thing that you know is going to hit, but you're like, oh, I want to amp up those odds, and then you start throwing other shit on there, and like you hit the thing, but you lose the bet.
Okay, this is a different situation than gambling sober. This is again back to my gambling tenets in life. Never place a parlay. No, 2 things.
No,
you won. No parlays.
You only place the parlay because you're drunk.
No parlays over 2 to 3 legs. 3 legs is the most I will go. No same game parlays ever. The same game parlay is like an absolute
it's a black
trap.
hole.
Oh my God.
It's a black hole.
No one's ever won a same game parlay ever. Ever. I defy anybody to tell me they've won a same game parlay. You ever look at the ones that they promote on the gambling apps?
Oh my God, they're so bad.
It's like, hey, plus 5,000. Josh Allen throws 1 touchdown in every quarter, and Joe Burrow throws for 300 yards, and also you go over 49, and also the Bills win. It's like that's not going to happen, but they entice you with it, and it's like instead of putting it all together yourself, it's like a 1 button. All you got to do is push the button to bet it.
It's a convenience thing.
I promise you, none of those have ever hit, ever.
Yeah.
But looking at what we pretty much know the playoff picture is going to be right now, or what we believe it's going to be, aside from there's a few variables here and there. And obviously we have no clue what's going to happen with the Bills and the Bengals right now, because that game will not be resumed this week. So it may not be played, and we're going to have to see how that affects everything. We've talked about like the most disappointing teams on this podcast quite a bit this season. Who's the biggest surprise to you?
Yeah, I mean, I assume you mean in a positive way.
Positive, good surprise, because we talk about the bad surprises a lot.
I would have to say it's Seattle. I mean, I think they are definitely the team that jumped up the farthest from where people expected them to be, potentially going 9-8 when quarterback situation going into the year, thinking they might be a 4-win team. I would say that's the biggest jump. The other one that I would say is the Jaguars, and that is, I would say, squarely on the shoulders of Trevor Lawrence's son.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had the Jags written down as my most surprising team as well. They're one of the only teams that's likely going to be in the playoffs that we didn't even consider in the preseason. There was a little buzz in the preseason for them to win the AFC South. And most people kind of looked at that and they're like, yeah, I don't know. They were pretty bad last season, and Trevor Lawrence
Yeah.
didn't look good. We talked about this in the preseason that just like the fact that they have an adult in the room
Yep.
at coach has made a huge difference for them.
Yeah.
And like Doug Peterson, still not a good coach, but
Nope.
just the night and day difference between an adult and Urban Meyer with this team is
Yeah.
absolutely amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Like I was gonna try to make an analogy with other coaches, and I was like, oh wait, we've never seen another coach that's on a level of bad as Urban Meyer.
Yeah, and now to be in a position to have a home game on Saturday against a decimated Titans team who has opted to start Josh Dobbs at quarterback. And if you win that, you get to host a playoff game. Like, no matter what happens with Seattle this weekend, they're not hosting a playoff game. And I also think like the vibe on Seattle is kind
Yeah.
of in a downward trajectory right now because they started so good and they've gone
Yep.
downhill, where the Jags is the opposite, where they started so bad and then they've been so good lately. So I think like momentum's a little bit more on the Jags side, but yeah, I would say those are the two top most surprising teams. I mean, aside like the playoff race in the AFC, you got the Jags is still an open question. The seeding for the top three seeds is open. And then you have a couple other teams we talked about in the preseason, the Patriots, the Dolphins, kind of going at it for that last spot.
Yep.
Also, the Steelers kind of have come out of nowhere
Yeah.
the last couple of weeks, which is funny because a couple of weeks ago, probably 5 weeks ago, I wrote this topic for the podcast where I was like, hey, this is typically the time someone comes out of nowhere. Who do you think it's going to be? And we talked about a couple different teams. To our credit, like we had the Lions correct, but
Yeah.
I feel like we haven't talked much about the Steelers at all this season, and now they're potentially in a position to make a playoff.
You kind of got to look at that and say that's clearly going back to the quarterback, right? I mean, we talked about having an adult in the room in terms of the coaching staff. Well, I I think you have to have someone competent in the room in terms of being a quarterback. And I know the Trubisky truthers are out there for you, but I Trubisky ain't it. Like
Careful what you say,
he's
Matt. They'll come for you.
I'm okay with it because I don't feel like there's a whole lot of teeth there.
So funny. They gave me so much shit in the offseason for all the bad things I said about Trubisky. And then he comes out and he starts and goes, 2-6 or whatever he went,
Yeah.
and has the lowest expected points added of any quarterback in the league.
Yeah.
He was like 43 out of 43 qualified quarterbacks with the lowest EPA per dropback. And I was just like, this is your man that you guys were coming for me for all offseason. This is your man.
Yeah. And if I am a Steelers fan right now, and thank God I'm not, uh, but I gotta look at that 2-6 record with Trubisky and be like, man, we might not even have to be like playing our way in here if we had just rolled with Kenny Pickett from the start after we drafted him in the first round and knew we didn't have anyone competent in the room.
I think that's been the problem with Tomlin for a while now in Pittsburgh, is that he doesn't want to play the young guys
Yeah.
that much. He wants to go with like the experienced vets. And it's like, dude, just play the best guys. I guarantee it'll go way better for you.
Yeah, but saying that Mitchell Trubisky is an experienced vet is like saying that a dude who just like repeatedly gets his ass kicked on the streets is an experienced MMA fighter. Like that it's equally as accurate.
It's not good experience. It's just experience. Another good call by us on the standings. We both had Philly winning the NFC East,
Yep.
even though the Cowboys were favored going into the season. We also talked about Philly as like a dark horse Super Bowl contender on our preview show when we were looking
Yeah.
at like, okay, the NFC's wide open this season. Who could it possibly be? We did talk about Philly in depth with the addition of AJ Brown. So good calls there.
I don't think either one of us expected the NFC as a whole to be as bad as it wound up being. 'Cause, I mean, like you roll through that conference and there's just not a whole lot of teams you have any sort of confidence in.
Yeah, it was tough. And I remember like going back and picking the teams. I listened back to the all of our preseason podcasts this past week.
Yeah.
And we were going through wild cards. I had 49ers, Saints, and Cowboys as my wild cards. You had Bucks, 49ers, and Cards. We talked like at length about like, God, it's so hard to pick 7 teams who are going to make the playoffs in this conference. And we're
Yeah.
like, do we pick the Lions? Do we pick the Vikings?
Yeah.
Like I talked up Carolina a little bit because I was just like, I just have no idea who these wild cards are going to be. So there was potential. So
Carolina tried to make you look good.
if they would have made the playoffs, I would have taken partial credit for it. I would have just been like, hey, I talked them up. No, but there's a bunch of teams. If you also remember right before the season started, I talked about a 5-page long Reddit post where a guy said, you got to watch out for the Falcons this season. And we talked about on the podcast how you do not have to watch out for the Falcons at all. And that was another good call. So,
Yeah.
But speaking of good and bad calls, before the season started, Matt and I made bold predictions for every division except for the NFC West, because the NFC West preview pod was like the great lost podcast. So would have been interesting to see what that would have looked like. But we both have hit one of our bold predictions. And like, just as a reminder to everybody out there, when we go bold, we go like bold. This is not like, oh, I bet Joe Burrow throws for 4,000 yards this season. Like a lot of like ESPN articles will lay out for you. So we've both hit one already, and we both have potential to hit a second. The ones we hit, I had Jalen Hurts as a top 5 fantasy player. And even though he missed the last 2 games, he's finished as the number 3 overall fantasy player right now. Burrow was probably going to pass him, but we don't know what's going to happen with that. So Jalen Hurts is 3, maybe 4 if they resume that game at some point, or they, it's so up in the air right now for everything, for the standings, for fantasy, for who's going to win our fantasy championship. No clue. So Hurts is going to finish as a top 5 player either way, though. So I hit that one. You had Dak Prescott with less than 30 touchdowns. So he's at 22 right now. So unless he throws 8 this weekend, then I think you're good.
Yeah. I honestly, in hindsight, I could have gone lower. But I didn't anticipate the injury. But I mean, I'd be a dick if I did. So
nope. A win's a win. And then the potential ones, depending on what happens this weekend, we could both have 2. I'm pretty confident I'm going to get mine. I had the Las Vegas Raiders as a bottom 3 pass defense this season. They're currently 29th. So they're one outside of where I would need them to be to hit this. However, the Lions are 30th. So the Lions are the next team, and they're separated by only 3 yards per game. This weekend, the Raiders play the Chiefs in a game that the Chiefs need in order to lock up the 1 seed or the 2 seed, or they need it for seeding on a Saturday. And then the Lions play the Packers. So I did the math. If Mahomes throws for about 50 more yards than Rodgers this weekend, then I'll hit this because they'll pass the Lions. And I'm pretty confident that Mahomes is going to throw for 50 more yards than Aaron Rodgers does this weekend.
If you are doubting that, I really need you to go look at Rodgers' stats, especially his stats over the course of the year, like progressively, because it's telling.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to get 2, which 2 out of 7 is pretty good for how big we go. Like we were talking people breaking records, winning triple crowns, all sorts of crazy stuff like that. Your one that you might hit, you had the Lions making the playoffs. which I feel like this is cheating because you didn't pick the Lions to make the playoffs when we did our picks, but your bold prediction was that they would. So anyway, it's a bold prediction. We talked about, you guys need Seattle to lose. You need to beat Green Bay, but this is still open. So we could both hit 2, which is pretty good. Even though some of us cheat.
Hey, we probably should have caught that earlier.
Yeah. Doesn't matter. You just do whatever you want. It's our podcast.
That's literally what I do at my work. So
the only other
stops me.
The only other one that I had a couple more that I was a little bit close on that aren't going to hit. I want partial credit for my Justin Jefferson take from before the season. My bold prediction for the NFC North was that Justin Jefferson was going to win the receiving Triple Crown.
Mm-hmm.
And even though by some miracle he only posted a 1 catch for 15-yard performance against the Packers this past weekend, he still leads the league in catches and in yards. So we got 2 out of 3. That's pretty good. He's just not going to get the touchdowns because Devontae Adams has 6 more than he does right now. So unless something absolutely insane happens this weekend, we're going to get 2 legs of the Triple Crown. So I think I deserve half a point.
Yeah, and I was I don't know how, but the Saints almost did it.
The Saints almost did it. I actually threw out 2 for the AFC West. My other one was that Travis Kelce is going to set the record for most targets by a tight end. And he is 11 away with 1 game left to play. I doubt that he gets 11 this weekend, but is not completely outside of the realm of possibilities.
I just can't imagine that game is competitive long enough for him to get 11.
Yeah, I really doubt he gets it, but I was looking at it today and I was just oh God, it's so close. But
yeah, I mean, if it weren't the Raiders, I'd consider it, but no team has ever tanned another team's hide the same way that the Chiefs seem to do that to the Raiders.
Actually, I think the Raiders play them pretty close, don't they?
I mean, the last couple of years, they've given them some absolute shellackings.
Brutal.
Multiple 40 burgers.
It's a hard division to be in when you have to play Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert twice a year. It's really tough.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you choose Josh McDaniels as your head coach.
Mm-hmm. One take on this podcast that aged very well is that we talked about the potential for Patrick Mahomes to actually be better without Tyreek Hill.
Yep.
And he's been phenomenal this season.
Yeah, I think this is the best football he's played in his career, including his 50 touchdown year.
So going back and looking at all of our takes from the season and listening to all of our preseason podcasts this week, I came up with at least some of my takes that aged well and aged poorly. Aged well. Travis Etienne now has 1,400 yards from scrimmage, meaning that I have won our bet and that you have to buy me a beer. Aged poorly. My bold fantasy take on a podcast I went on was that he would finish as an RB1. Travis Etienne is RB17. So if you play in a 17-man league, I fucking nailed it. Most of us do not. So he is a pretty good, ended up as a pretty good RB2 though.
Yeah, that was definitely helped by the James Robinson trade for sure. And he was obviously the reason for it, but had a nice coming out this year.
Yeah, I'm just glad. We talked about at the beginning of the season how he was averaging 67 yards per game through the first 3 games. And I was that actually puts us on pace to hit 1,100, which was our bet.
Barely.
Yeah, I was we're just going to do the 67 yards at a time. And then obviously things changed in a big way. Take that aged well. My top 3 fantasy football recommendations for this season were Jalen Hurts, who finishes as the number 3 overall player, number 3 quarterback. Justin Jefferson, who finishes as the number 5 overall player, the number 1 overall wide receiver / flex player, and at least in 0.5 and full PPR. And AJ Brown, who finishes 29th overall and wide receiver 6. Takes that aged poorly. None of those 3 guys were on any of my fantasy teams this season. what the fuck I was doing. I recommended all three of them to everybody multiple times. Didn't take them.
Why would you do that?
Yeah. Why would I ever go get the guys that I want? Listen to Yahoo standings instead and take fucking Najee Harris in the first round.
I drafted Cam Akers early and then didn't play him the 1 week that I needed to play him.
Mm-hmm. You ever go back and look at a fantasy draft at the end of the season?
Not anymore.
Don't. My recommendation to you is do not, because all you will look at is the missed opportunities. Yeah. And trust me, they are belligerent and numerous. Take that aged well. Like I said, I was very bullish on the 49ers after they re-signed Jimmy Garoppolo. I was like, I think this is a real contender now. If Trey Lance doesn't play well, then they have Jimmy to back him up. And I thought it was going to be a really good season for the 49ers. Take that aged poorly, Trey Lance. Just that's it. Just fucking anything I said regarding Trey Lance in the preseason has all aged very poorly.
Another combo that we talked about preseason that you didn't bring up, the Packers were going to have trouble scoring points this year. And that was spot on. They've struggled all year. They've been a little bit better since they've committed to the run more, but they are still not a highest scoring team. And yeah, they blew out the Vikings, but the Vikings literally laid down on the field from the start and just said, "Here, you can have it."
Does Vikings gonna Vike need to be a new catchphrase for this podcast?
It doesn't have the same ring to it, but it's true.
This should be our line of shirts for this podcast. Yeah. It's just every team says hey, Patriots gonna Pate, Lions gonna Lion, Brown's gonna Brown. Just every single team, even the good ones. Hey, Bill's gonna Bill. Never know. So no, there's some really good stuff. There was some not so good stuff from the preseason. It's hard to predict an NFL season, but I think looking back on what we had, we did a really good job.
This feels like the most chaotic NFL season I have ever watched.
I agree with that. And also the fact that it's a week longer than most NFL seasons is adds another week to the chaos. Yeah, it's been a fun season though. I've enjoyed it for the most part outside of having to watch my team who now somehow might make the playoffs. All these Patriot fans are out there talking themselves into hey man, we can make a run. The Giants did it twice. I don't think I've enjoyed a single game of Patriots football except for when we beat the Lions. I think that was the one game I enjoyed, and it's because we won 29-0. And even then I was didn't have that much fun.
That is the Patriots game that I enjoyed the least this year.
I could see that. I could see that. No, but I mean, especially the last couple of weeks, man. You got the Raiders game. Obviously, it ended in lateral damage. You got a stupid Bengals game that we could have won, didn't win. Yeah. You fumbled the ball on the 5-yard. The last couple of weeks have been brutal, and then all of a sudden, Miami is just we're gonna go 0-5 in December and January. Fuck it. Who cares? We're just gonna be horrible in the cold weather. And now here we are. If we win against the Bills this weekend, we're in. The Bills need this game for seeding. So my advice to all of the listeners is to bet whatever the Bills line is in this. If it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 27, take the Bills and the spread. Take the spread.
Yeah.
They're going to annihilate us this weekend.
Yeah. I mean, especially after what happened. I think that obviously they're very concerned for their teammate and friend and all that, but man, when they get to go out there and hit someone again, they're going to leave every last shred of decency they have in the locker room.
Yeah, I really think our only hope is that the NFL says that the Bills have to play the Bengals on Saturday and then play the Patriots on Sunday. It's our only hope of making the playoffs. But the other exercise that we completed this week and wanted to go back and review was Matt and I both put our top 10 quarterback list back together
Yeah.
and updated the rankings for through 17 weeks of the NFL season. So in the preseason, we did a whole hour long episode about who our top 10 quarterbacks going into the season were. And now Matt and I both did our list. We made some updates. The order is different. There's some different faces on there.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to review it. I'll run over the original list and the new list real quick, and we'll talk about what's changed for us. The original list, Josh Allen was our number one quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick Mahomes was number two. We now have Allen and Mahomes tied for first in our new composite list. You had Allen still first overall as your number one quarterback. I changed my quarterback from Allen to Mahomes, which I feel like is right. It's Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. You kind of pick your poison there.
Yeah, I don't think you can argue anyone else at this point. Mahomes is playing so well, especially as a passer right now, that like no one could fault anyone for putting him number one. And the only reason that I slotted Allen slightly higher than him is that like I still think he is approximately as adept as a passer as him, but what he offers as a runner is just infinitely more. The way he can function as your goal line back, as well as I think he had something like 52 runs for first downs this year. And that's like running back numbers. That's like the number one thing that is so hard to defend in the NFL is a quarterback that is just going to punish you with his legs.
Yeah, he's a freak athlete, especially like for his size and to be able to move around the way he does. The only reason I put him at 2 is because he's tied for the lead league in turnovers with Matt Ryan. And I still just think he sometimes has that hero ball mentality too much.
I am concerned not about his capacity with the fumbling, but with his recklessness leading to the fumbling, because that is an issue. He's fumbled 13 times this year, and kind of needs to stop that.
Yeah, it's just like anytime you're tied with Matt Ryan for the lead league in turnovers, it's like it's not great, and it scares me for them because like they are one of those teams where it's like God, the only team that can really beat these guys is themselves.
Yep.
And turnovers is like the number one way to beat yourself.
Yeah.
In the NFL, especially when you have a defense plan as well as theirs.
Yeah. Turnovers and big special teams plays.
Yep. Number 3, 4, 5, and 6 on our original list were Tom Brady, Matt Stafford, Joe Burrow, and Justin Herbert. And it's funny because if you go back to that podcast, I talked a lot about how I wanted to put Burrow in my top 3 before the season. I was like, it was just so hard to put him over Brady and Stafford at that point. Yeah. We finally got to do it. Joe Burrow after the season is now number 3. So we have Burrow, Herbert, Brady, and then Stafford as the 3 through 6 on the new list. So really what's happened is that Burrow and Herbert have surpassed Brady and Stafford on our list.
Yeah.
Which we talked this season about how we were watching the passing of the torch every single week with the old guard and the new. And I feel like this is a good representation of that we've seen. Like our top 4 guys are all in their first, 6, 7 seasons in the league. Like they're all still relatively young guys. And Burrow and Herbert being younger than Allen and Mahomes, they are now stepping into that 3-4 role.
Yeah.
Like I feel like we have a very clear top 4 of Allen, Mahomes, Burrow, Herbert. Like I don't feel like there's much arguing that.
There's such a gap right now, and maybe that gap is smaller, next year when we see some of these come back and teams fix some stuff. Obviously, like the season was a disaster from the start for both Stafford and Brady, and it never really got better. But no one else has really closed that gap at any point in the season.
I mean, Herbert's at 4, but if I was doing tiers of quarterbacks, I would say like, okay,
Yes, you're right.
super, yeah. Well, I would say like super talented guys who I know are going to get it done in the playoffs. Mahomes, Allen, Burrow. Next tier, super talented dude, unsure of if he's going to get it done in the playoffs this
Yeah,
season or not. And that's like Herbert by himself because he's like the most talented dude who we don't know how he's going to
yeah,
perform because we've never seen him in the playoffs before.
yeah. Those three guys are kind of in their own class together. Herbert has all the talent in the world to join them, but yeah, I mean, we haven't seen the consistency strung together, uh, like as a passer from the rookie year. I mean, I think he did really all we could have asked of him this year to kind of put himself in position to, make his way into that class. He does not have the same touchdown numbers as those other guys, but I mean, he also doesn't have, a Jamar Chase or
Well, even the guys he does have
Travis
missed,
Kelsey.
yeah, the guys he does have missed a lot of time this season too.
Yep.
Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he's put himself in the conversation with those guys. We just have to see how he performs in the playoffs, and that's one of the things I'm looking forward to most about Wild Card Weekend is
Yeah.
that there's a good chance we're going to have Jags Chargers, and we're going to see his first playoff game on the road. Man, it's like that's going to be really exciting. There's
Yeah.
also an opportunity right now that the four quarterbacks for the divisional round of the AFC are Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Herbert. And
Yeah.
that is going to be the best weekend of football of this
Yeah.
entire year. If you have like Mahomes versus Herbert and Burrow versus Allen or something like that,
Yeah.
give me all of that. Give me all of that because that's going to be incredible. The 5-6, the Brady Stafford tier would be like guys who have taken a step back physically,
Yeah.
who
The father time group.
coming for him, but also I still believe these guys can get it done in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Like I think Brady's going to put up a fight even if they lose in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
It's just Tom Brady, and if Stafford was healthy, I would be confident that that team would still be in the playoff hunt with him at quarterback.
Yeah.
So 7 on the original list was Lamar Jackson. We now have a tie for 7th between Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts. I thought about putting Jalen higher, but it's just like another guy where it's like, okay, it's been one season.
Yep.
And we don't know how he's going to do in the playoffs. So I feel like this is an appropriate place for him to be next to someone who is a phenomenal regular season performer and has struggled in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you want to take over this spot by yourself? You want to talk about moving up the list a little bit, Jalen Hurts? We got to see it. Divisional round and beyond. Like it's time. It's time for him to show it. Number 9 was Trevor Lawrence. We talked about how he's made a huge jump this season. Both of us had him on our list. And especially like the last couple of weeks, he's been playing phenomenally.
Yeah.
Another dude who we're going to see probably him versus Herbert in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah.
And I'm here for it, man. Mr. Generational Talent, Mr. Second Year Jump.
I really like how decisive he's been with his legs, like to close out the season. Like that's been a real game changer for him.
Yeah, I like the contrast of these two quarterbacks going up against each other, super talented guys.
Mm-hmm.
One dude was like the most hyped up prospect since Andrew Luck. Another dude was like a high level quarterback prospect who nobody believed in the draft community.
Yeah.
They're both like Herbert is excellent. Trevor Lawrence is getting there. For both of their first playoff games to be against each other, I enjoy the dichotomy of that game. I like that.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun game to watch, especially because like those Jaguar wide receivers have overperformed what was expected of all of them.
And all of a sudden, Evan Ingram is like a legitimately good tight end.
Yeah.
The defense is balling again. They remember that earlier this season they were so high in DVOA, but they were like 2-6. And it was
Yeah.
just like, I want to believe in this team, but I watch them every Sunday and they shoot themselves in the foot. And
Yeah.
they've come around and they've won some close games. They got some good wins, and I would bet you they beat the Titans on Saturday.
Yeah. It's
Home game.
amazing what happens when you play fundamentally sound football the vast majority of the time and then you stop making errors. Just like don't shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, I would say another take that's aged poorly, not necessarily for us, but just for like all of people who talk NFL as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
is that like everybody was trashing the Christian Kirk contract. And I still don't know if he's worth that much money, but he's been way better than I think people expected him to be this season. Like he's been a legit like wide receiver one, wide receiver two for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Christian Kirk has definitely, made a statement to the people who are laughing at the contract. Still think it's an overpay, but I would also say that in probably 2 years' time, we're gonna look at that contract and it's gonna fit in a lot more with guys that are kind of in his class. So
That's fair. It's just always when you're the first one, and especially when you're a small market, like I know this because
yeah,
I'm a fan of a small market team in
right.
basketball. There's always going to be an overpay factor to get
Yep.
people to come to you.
Well,
Um,
you've also got to remember that he is now the reason that wide receivers in his class are going to get that amount of money.
yeah,
So,
that's the thing. You set
so
the market. So like 7 in our original list was Lamar. We have Lamar and
yeah.
Hurts at 7, 8. 8 was Rodgers. 9, I had Watson. You had Carr. 10, I had Kyler Murray. You had Russell Wilson. The 9 on our list now is Trevor Lawrence, and then the 10 on our list, you had Geno Smith. I am probably going to regret this, but I opted to keep Aaron Rodgers in the top 10. So he fell down 2 spots from 8 to 10. We can get into the Aaron Rodgers versus Geno thing here in a second, but I did just
Mhm.
want to say one thing we talked about when putting this list together is when we got to 9 and 10 in the preseason, it was just like, it was like the wild card thing in the NFC that we talked about earlier. It's just like,
Yeah.
I don't know who the fuck I'm going to put in these spots. It's just, there was so many like mediocre options. It's like, God, you know,
Can
Russell
I just
Wilson,
can I
Christian
just stop
Kirk.
doing this?
Yeah, I was like, can we just do top 8? Can we just stop after 8 or
Yeah.
stop after 7? We did honorable mention Jalen Hurts during the podcast, though, as someone who could jump up into the top 10.
Yeah.
We didn't talk Geno Smith at all in the
Nope.
preseason. Um, and he's someone who, I would still, if we made the list a little bit longer, I don't think I would go too much further before I had him. So I definitely I don't blame you for having him in the top 10. He's had a hell of a season.
Yeah, I mean, just quick cursory look at the stats. He has thrown more touchdowns and thrown less interceptions and thrown for more yards. So, like on a basic level there, he has played better this year. Diving deeper into uh Aaron Rodgers and like yeah, like I'll give the Packers as a team like credit. They have actually played better over the last several weeks, and they've been a little bit more of a consistent and a little bit more of a challenge as a team. However, you look at the stats, and every month, Aaron Rodgers has had a lower average yards passing every single month of the year. That's because the team has moved the offense away from his arm. He is not offering much as a passer. And like honestly, the like little like narrative that maybe Aaron Rodgers is starting to kind of like get it together has kind of been on the back of Christian Watson, like just having a few games where he balls out. And like I get that quarterbacks need wide receivers, but if you're going to be a quarterback in the top 10, you should be able to make a few plays here and there without needing your wide receiver to do all the work. He's been bad on third downs. He is 20th in the NFL in third down conversion rate on passing attempts. And the list of quarterbacks ahead of him on that list is a little bit concerning. When I look at what Aaron Rodgers has done this year, I don't know a single thing that he's brought to the table that actually makes his team better.
So, not going to argue the stats because obviously they're not good. He hasn't been great this season by any stretch, but I know this from firsthand experience watching Tom Brady in New England. The lack of weapons in an offense can seriously hinder any quarterback. So Tom Brady's last season in New England, when they had basically nothing for him to throw to, his stats were pretty much identical to what Aaron Rodgers has done this season. Like literally identical. And then he goes into a situation and like people were like arguing with me all the time. They're like, dude, your boy's done. Brady's arm is a wet noodle. He can't throw anymore. He doesn't have the accuracy. He doesn't bring anything to the table. Basically, like all the things you just said about Aaron Rodgers. Then he goes somewhere where there's weapons in Tampa Bay. And he starts putting up like 4,500, 5,000, 40 touchdowns, Super Bowls, playoff wins, like just stats galore again. And for the last couple of years, now nobody's talking shit about his arm.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the weapons are a component. I'm not going to deny that, but you got to do something. And like the fact that they're getting better as he is producing less, that is the biggest alarm for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm not done yet. What you mentioned about like his lower yards per attempt and completion this is all by design because all they have in that receiving room is Allen Lazard, two rookies who, like Christian Watson, has had a couple good games. Yeah. He's been good, but I mean, admittedly, and you've said this on this podcast like 5 times this season, he came into the league not knowing how to catch a football.
Yep.
So it's been an uphill climb. These guys don't know the calls still. You know, they got guys running wrong routes out there.
Right.
Which is tough. They're running the offense they always should have been running, where he's throwing to Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon more, and they're relying more on the running backs because those are the best players in their offense. Like, I'm not saying that he's this great quarterback who's only hindered by the weapons.
Yeah.
Because he's obviously not what he used to be. He's another guy that Father Time is taking its toll on. But the strength of your team is offensive line, running backs.
Yes.
You should have been relying on those two things this entire season. And instead, they're like, oh, no, we're just going to run the same offense we always ran, and we'll just like throw Allen Lazard in the Devontae Adams spot. And it just doesn't work like that.
No,
in the NFL.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. And it's always been a false narrative that he makes receivers.
Yes.
I actually don't think that quarterbacks make receivers ever. I don't think there's any quarterback in NFL history who like makes all his receivers. There are quarterbacks who make them better for sure. But like, it's not like Tom Brady and Peyton Manning were even pulling guys off the scrap heap and making them legitimate receivers without them also like being good players.
There are situations where a quarterback makes a receiver here or there. Example, Stafford, Kenny Galladay. I don't think he's caught more than like 15 passes since he left Detroit.
Right, but it's not fucking rocket science. When you play with a better quarterback, you play better.
Yes. But like as a rule, like this player is gonna make receivers. No, that doesn't happen. I hear that he needs weapons, but I also don't think that means that he's any better than the way he's playing. And the third down conversion rate is pretty rough as well.
No, it's bad, but like just from watching the full season of Tom Brady having to throw to like N'Keal Harry and like rookie Jacoby Myers and all that stuff, it just affects everything.
Yeah. Well, and you say, like, these guys don't know the calls. And Aaron Rodgers was recently questioned about, the reports about him not actually like teaching his receivers the calls, and he just blows it off. And it's like, okay, well, that's essentially confirmation that you are part of why these guys are not up to speed.
Yeah, I just think that I think that if he had been playing in an offense that had DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett in it, then the numbers are better. And it's like, yeah, the
Yeah.
numbers aren't great, but we're not talking about like horrifically bad touchdown and yard numbers. He's seventh in the league in touchdowns and 12th in yards.
No.
He's not even like in the bottom half of the league in either of those categories or the bottom half for starters.
No, he's not. I mean, part of that is, you know, some guys have gotten injured, so that kind of like throws things off a bit. But um I mean, I think you're seeing a guy who is dramatically different in how he plays. Um and I just don't think without a Devontae Adams, he's ever going to return to the point of being like the guy who is a weapon for you.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure,
Yeah.
especially with
Yeah.
the different things that Father Time has taken away from him.
Yeah.
Um,
I do not think that if you put him on Seattle, he would have had better numbers than what Geno Smith had.
I that's gonna have to be an agree to disagree because we're never
Yeah.
gonna know the answer to that.
Yeah.
But I'm taking the track record of the dude who's been, deservedly or not, the MVP of the league for the last couple of seasons, where he's put up elite stats at least for a couple of years in a row, and he's having a down year now that they got rid of his best target. We'll see with him. I think that he may not enter next season in my top 10 quarterback list, but like
Yeah.
I have him hanging on to the edge, especially because like I looked at putting Geno Smith in there,
Yeah.
and my concern with Geno was that his season's been phenomenal, like way better than
Yes.
anybody ever thought he was capable of, and I'm super happy for him. But it started here and it went up, and
Yeah.
it's just kind of been going down like week by week. Like you look at the months, it's like every month the stats are getting worse. We're going in a downward trajectory here
Yep.
for the whole Seahawks team, for the team as a whole.
Yes.
We're
Yeah.
seeing that as well.
And that was where I was willing to give him a little bit of some grace. Is like, okay, well, how much of this is on him, and how much of this is just like, all right, well, we had our plan going into the year, and now teams are kind of onto it, and we're not adjusting.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
some of it's coaching for
yeah.
sure, but it's just like
So
it's hard to separate like how much is him being the full-time starter for his first like full season in a long time, and like is he wearing down a little bit as the season goes? How much is coaching? How much is like injuries have taken away from it? It's difficult, and he's another guy where like, okay, I want to see him in the playoffs because I know
yep.
Aaron Rodgers isn't great in the playoffs, but Geno Smith doesn't even have a playoff page on Football Reference.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's earned a lot more respect this year too. I think another component is that like he's clearly got something as a leader. And that is something that like Aaron Rodgers is an absolute black hole in that area. So
I mean, even just from the story you just talked about, where they're like, "Do you teach the receivers the hand signs?" And he's like, "Eh."
they were asking him about a story that was written about it, and he was like, "That was the dumbest story written all year." And just like, it's like, okay, so it's true.
But yeah, but was it true though? So yeah, so that's where the list is at right now. We'll probably take another look at it after the playoffs, like as part of our Super Bowl wrap up, and just say like, okay, who moved up, who moved down, because the question on a lot of these guys is like, you got Herbert, you got
Yeah.
Hurts, you got Jackson, Aaron Rodgers,
Mm-hmm.
Smith. A lot of these guys, it's still like, okay, how is he going to perform in the playoffs when it
Yeah.
really matters? So we'll take another look at it here in 5 or 6 weeks after the Super Bowl. The last thing I wanted to talk about quickly before we sign off is the update on our fantasy football conundrum here. So we talked about this last week. I made the championship in the weirdest way possible. Matt was relegated to the third place game after missing the championship by 0.38 points.
Pain.
Matt proceeded to put up what 130 this week.
Well, currently I have put up 114.38 because I'm waiting to see if Joe Burrow is going to play.
Yeah, so you put up 114 without Joe Burrow.
Yeah.
Right, basically. You're projected at like 133, which we talked about on the podcast last week. We knew was going to happen. We
Yep.
knew your team was going to go off. The weird situation I find myself in, and I'm sure that there are a lot of fantasy football players out there who find themselves in a similar situation. I was up by 9 points going into last night, the Monday Night Football game, and my opponent had Josh Allen and Devin Singletary. And I pretty much just wrote it off. I was like, my little 6-8 team, the little engine that could, making it all the way to the championship is a pretty good, that's a good story, man. That's pretty good for a 6-8 football team. Well, I think you guys all know what happened last night at this point, with Damar Hamlin's injury. And I actually just saw an article while we were recording that says that his breathing is getting better and that his body's starting to breathe on its own. So really good, and still, absolutely fingers crossed, and we're all wishing the best for him and his family. I don't know what's going to happen with our fantasy football championship because the NFL came out and said the game will not be played this week. They will not reschedule that game for this week, which throws a wrench into all of the playoff standings.
Literally everything.
Yeah, potentially and I know I want to be very clear about this before I say this, that obviously everything with Damar Hamlin is way more important than football.
Yeah.
Everything that's going on with him. The NFL has made the right call by suspending the game and then not playing it and doing what they need to do and focusing on the human aspect of this. It's all the right call. But from a football perspective, because this is a football podcast, this is such an unprecedented situation that I just have no idea what's going to happen. Are they going to give those two teams a tie? They're not going to replay the game. So what happens? Hundreds of thousands of fantasy leagues out there where I'm sure the championship is still in the balance based on what scores they give these players. I could potentially win the championship in this horrible tainted fashion. And I think that just goes to show you how stupid of a game fantasy football is. And just a reminder that in general, that football is a game and that these guys are out there putting their lives and their bodies on the line, literally putting their lives on the line every weekend for our entertainment. So I think we should all appreciate them maybe a little bit more than we do. Not I never thought it was haha funny, but I always thought it was funny that a guy will tear his ACL and completely destroy his knee during a football game. And then you go on Twitter and everybody's like, oh, fuck that guy. He cost me my fantasy football week. He's such a piece of blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
People are going off on him. And meanwhile, this dude's in the hospital having surgery on his completely destroyed knee he may never walk on again. And it's just I think last night is something that should add perspective for a lot of people about the thing that's so scary about that play is that you look at it, it's just kind of like a normal football play. It wasn't like the dude took a huge shot to the head. It wasn't anything really super out of the ordinary. And then you have one of the scariest situations we've seen on a football field in, at least years and years since the last time we saw someone be paralyzed or, some of the horrible things that happened during this game. I don't know, man. Just everybody needs to have some perspective. There are relationships and expensive TVs and all sorts of shit that gets destroyed over this game. And it's ultimately, it is just a game, and everybody needs to take a deep breath and just know Damar's health is obviously more important than any of the things you guys got going on in your fantasy leagues. But I would like to know if I'm the champ or not. Someone at Yahoo needs to tell me. It just this would be the championship I would win, would just be this horribly tainted championship, and now I just got to sit with it forever and just always remember that I won this championship because someone almost died on a football field.
This is worse than the bubble championship, right?
This is the worst championship for sure, because I definitely would have lost if that hadn't happened, and now I might win, and I don't even know if I want it. Just like someone else take it. But
my random thought, or whatever you want to call it. So we're talking about our quarterbacks and talked a lot about Aaron Rodgers. And one of the things that Aaron Rodgers has always gotten a lot of credit for is his lack of interceptions. So I'm right now looking at the leaders in interceptions in the NFL right now. So Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, and Dak Prescott are all tied with 14 for the lead. After that, Josh Allen at 13, Patrick Mahomes at 12, Joe Burrow at 12, Aaron Rodgers at 11, Justin Herbert at 10. Stop pretending that a quarterback not throwing interceptions makes them better. Because if you're punting the ball away, is that better really than throwing an interception deep downfield? Not really. What matters is that if you do turn the ball over, your quarterback is good enough to go out and get points. That's what the difference is. I don't think anyone's going to care if Joe Burrow throws 14 interceptions, because they didn't last year.
I was actually thinking about this with Carr recently, Derek Carr.
Yeah.
And that, like, I was thinking about, like, he has the tools to be a great quarterback, and we've seen him have great games. And I was like, well, what's been the difference this season where he's had a horrible season? He got benched for Stidham, who, like, Stidham comes in and just balls out on the 49ers. I think part of being a great quarterback is, like, the lack of fear.
Yeah.
Like, the lack of fear of taking hits, the lack of fear of throwing interceptions, and just knowing, like, I have this rocket launcher for an arm. And, like, sometimes they get overconfident and throw balls into windows they shouldn't, and it gets picked off. But you also have to, like, have the confidence to come out and be like, it's just like striking out in baseball. If you come out thinking about the last time you struck out, you're going to strike out again, no matter what. You have to just be able to forget that play and just be like, okay, whatever, bad throw, let's shake it off and let's start whipping it around again.
Yeah.
And, like, yes, there's a limit because you don't want to be throwing like 25 interceptions. But it's like the fearlessness and the confidence of certain quarterbacks to keep coming out and keep going at it. And like you said, like, keep going down and doing what they need to do to score points. Where someone like Derek Carr's play has fallen off a tremendous amount this season because he looks afraid to do anything on a football field. It's confidence, it's fearlessness. And like, we joke, it's a big meme of like, oh, you know, fuck it, Jamar Chase is down there somewhere.
Yeah.
But there is just a degree of like, okay, I trust myself to make this throw. I trust my guy to make the play he needs to make to get it. And like, Rodgers never did that with Devontae Adams. And like, as great as Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers were in Green Bay, it cost them, you know, very specifically the 49ers game last season in Lambeau, cost him that game because he was afraid to take that shot for fear that it might be picked off or it might be turned over. And it's like, you had guys open deep. All you had to do was take that calculated risk. And I think that like, the ability to take the calculated risk and know when to do it and know how to do it is what separates good quarterbacks with great arms from great quarterbacks with great arms. So, but that is it for us. As always, Fouled Out can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, anywhere you get your podcast. You can hit us up on Twitter at Fouled Out Sports, and you can find Matt on Twitter at Matador_defense. You can find our videos on TikTok at Fouled Out Sports Podcast. Long name, but you can't miss it. And you can get 4 extra episodes of Fouled Out every month on Patreon at patreon.com/fouledout. I feel like that list gets longer every time I do it.
Yeah, it probably does.
Yep. So great season. One more great weekend of NFL football to go. Big games, big stakes starting on Saturday. There's seeding on the line. There's playoff spots on the line. There's a lot of good things going on. And then next week, Wednesday, we are going to release our wild card podcast previewing all 6 games and then giving you not only our picks for those games, but also how we would bet all 6 of them for you. Because we were 6-0 last year on the picks, and I got some feedback of people who are like, thank you for sharing your gambling picks when you guys decide to go 6-0. So we're sharing everything this week, baby. Let's do it. I'm ready. NFL playoff time.
Europe.
All right. Good luck this weekend, my friend. I'm rooting for the Motor City Kitties to make it.
Yeah, I've got two Packers fans in my office, so Monday is going to be a absolute war zone, regardless of what happens.
My order of rootitude this weekend is that I'm rooting for the Lions to make it number one. And then number two, I'm rooting for the Packers to make it because I want to bet against Aaron Rodgers. I have to bet against Aaron Rodgers. It's like in my DNA. It hurts me not to be able to bet against Aaron Rodgers in the playoffs. I have to do it. I crave it. I need it.
Well, I mean, it's easy to have a surefire thing.
It's free money. It's
It
free
is.
money. I was just thinking about just real quick, the quarterbacks that we're going to have to bet against in the playoffs this year. Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Lamar Jackson. It's beautiful. It's a thing of beauty. We're going to make so much money. Be a great season.
Yeah.
Don't ruin it, Lions. Don't ruin my fun. No, I'm just kidding. I'd be rooting. I'd root for you guys if you make it. I'm rooting for you to make it. Root for you guys when you make it.
Just think about the poetic justice of the Lions essentially putting a close on the Packers' reign in the division by beating them on Sunday Night Football, making sure they don't make the playoffs, and going into the next season with what's going to be 2 first-round picks and a hell of a lot more steam than the Packers are going to have.
You know that meme from Parks and Rec where Aziz Ansari is looking at the picture and he's like, "It's so beautiful. I've looked at it 15 times this morning." That's going to be you going into next season. So, but all right. Good luck this weekend, my friend, and I will see you soon.
Yep. See you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.